Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Mazza, percussionist, drummer, and artistic director of Kosa Music, inviting you to listen in conversations with friends, artists, professionals, and experts in our music world. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you can receive regular notices on upcoming episodes, interesting episodes that you might want to check out. Today I have a really, and I mean really a great pleasure of having with me someone that I've known for a number of years, a couple of years, and we'll get into that in our journeys. Somebody who's an incredible marimba player, incredible educator, and just an all-around incredible person. Linda Pimentel. Thank you so much, Linda, for joining me on this. Did I say that right? Pimentel? I wanted to ask you about that.
You did. You got it.
Okay. So before we start on this journey, I do want to ask how, people who are listening who may not know your work, where did this start for you? Like, what was the first seeds? What were those first sparks that started it for you?
Oh, well, I guess they began back when I was very young, maybe 3 years old, and I started playing around on my folks' piano, and that went on into music lessons that I was taking from a very good music teacher. And I looked across the room, and off in an L from the room was another room that was open, and I could see a very interesting instrument over there. She noticed that I was interested in it, so she's one day after our lesson said, "Linda, you want to go give that a try?" And so I went over, and for the first time, I heard the sound of a marimba, and I was blown away. This was a beautiful sound like I never heard before. It was totally the sound that got to me. It was just lovely. And then she told me that her daughter, who was then, I think, a university senior, was the one who played the marimba. Would I like to meet her? And I said, oh, yes. And that was the point when I met Marilyn Gibbs Beach. And she was my first marimba teacher. Now, she wasn't much older than me. She went through school very fast. And she's actually still alive.
Wow.
Don't think she's 95 now. I don't think she's reached her 96th birthday, but she's still living. And so she and I occasionally chat. And she's very alert, very with it, interesting to talk to.
And did she ever do any recordings? Because I had never heard of her until, you mentioned her.
No, she got married, and she married at the local university. She married the piano teacher. She was a piano major in university. And as she went ahead and she did some piano playing with him. And then she had 4 children. She's gotten her doctorate in a totally different field, and has gone ahead with all sorts of adventures in life.
Then you studied, you went on to, of course, you did your doctorate in, it was not in performance, it was research, or no, it was not research.
It was research,
something.
yes.
Okay.
My doctorate was research. But first then, I should just bounce along the way because there's a couple of things in there you might be interested in.
Oh, please,
One
please.
was that, let's see, I'll have to think. 1962, I was married by that time, and in fact, I'd had my second daughter, Sylvia Pimentel, whom you know. And
Wow.
My friend Evelyn Leisky and somebody heard us play one day. And we had 2 junky old marimbas, not the good ones that we have now, but we had these 2 older marimbas. And so somebody heard us play in church. And so this company called Chapel Records offered us a contract. They wanted to record us. And so they recorded us playing religious music. And the music, I think in some setting you could still get the recording. And I know it's on YouTube. a couple of ones from the recording is. And I think it's under Marimba Moves. And I think, can't remember the names of the two pieces. Let All the Nations Praise the Lord is one of them. And Overshadowed or something like that is the name of the other one. And so they're still floating around, which was to my amazement until somebody pointed it out to me just recently. And of
Nice.
course, my life has continued since then, and I'm now 84 years old.
Incredible.
So
When
anyway,
you
where do we go next?
no, when you said 84, I said, what? That's impossible because you're still that long blonde, the woman that's long,
Little
slender, with
shorter.
long, but yeah, but I remember you with really long blonde hair and really playing
Mhm.
marimba, fantastic. But I mean, along the way there, I mean, you know, you did a lot of work with, because when I met you, it was one of these marimba camps with
Yes,
James Moore, who was
that's
running
right.
in Ohio. Was that Columbus, Ohio? It was in
Yes,
Ohio
it was in
somewhere.
Columbus.
Columbus, Ohio.
Jim Moore
Wow.
was very, very interesting and very important in the world of marimba and in the world of percussion playing in general. He's the one that developed Percussive Notes magazines and some of
That-
the things that are now our journals.
Right.
And so I had run into him. I joined the early beginnings. This is before there was an official Percussive Arts Society, but the early beginnings. And I was particularly interested because my daughter Sylvia was playing marimba, and I wanted to extend things out. And I had I was teaching in public schools and at that time, and I had several students there playing marimba and a few private pupils too. And so I arranged to go to that marimba camp. And when I got there, I had written Jim and I had said, uh, can I come along and work? I'll pay for her and everything, but anything you need me for. And so that's how it all got started working with Jim. And then we had a long relationship. He and his wife, Marilyn, and I were good friends. And then he developed his publishing company. He'd already had Percussive Notes magazine going. And so that's how our books happen to be published. I think there's a copy of one of them right there.
Yes, and you know, I was looking at that, and I have that one. Actually, I
You
still
do?
have a bunch of them. Yes.
Oh, yeah, there's quite a few of them.
Yeah. I remember because I mean, at the time when I suddenly, you know, for me, my journey was, I mean, I was a rock drummer, and then all of a sudden I got turned on to classical music and jazz and all of that. So I became kind of a maniac, and I went to a percussion symposium. Remember the Lyric Percussion Symposiums?
Oh,
70,
yes.
73 was the first one I went to, and
Uh-huh.
it totally turned me around. And that's where, you know, Gary Burton was in, I was in Gary Burton's class, and he showed me how to hold four mallets. I mean, not that I could play
Oh,
them, but
yes. The Gary Burton grip. Yes. I
yes.
can use that.
And
Yes.
nobody was playing. I mean, here, everybody had, it was funny because I had just started university, but I was still a novice, but I really wanted to do this. And against all odds, I said, I got to do this. And it was just burning. And so when I went to university, everybody was playing Bergeron mallets, which were really hard. I mean, they used them a lot for contemporary music. So you couldn't really do any like really musical stuff with that. And I came back
Mhm.
from that camp, and I had Burton mallets, I had David Friedman mallets, I bought all kinds of
Oh,
mallets.
yes.
And then I could actually hold four
I
mallets.
still love the Friedman mallets and Samuel's mallets and all of those. In fact, Warren Heyer, whom I'm sure you may know,
Yes.
just rebuilt these right here. And this is the Musser M223, I think it says. And he's rebuilt them all for me,
Nice,
rewrapped
nice.
and everything.
I remember, you know, about those mallets. It was the guy's name was Bill Marimba. I don't know if it was his real name, but he was
Uh
giving a
huh.
class on building those mallets, like how to make the mallets. So I learned how to wind the
Huh?
mallets, the Good Vibes mallets that he had created at the time. So
Huh?
I mean, they're fabulous. So that was my start. So I came back to university, and everybody said, "Aldo, we want to buy your mallets." I said, "Yeah, but I didn't buy enough for everybody." So I just
That's
sold
right.
them, and then I contacted Bill Marimba, and I said I bought a bunch more for myself, and that was great. But that's what got me going in that world of working with all of these people, and then I just seeked out everything I could. I was a bit of a maniac, as I said. I wanted to learn, so I put myself in every situation whether it was a marimba camp, a percussion camp, a jazz camp. I went to all the Jamie Aebersold camps, to the big band
Oh,
camps,
yes.
and I was probably going to more camps than working. And at one point, I started working a lot because I had moved to Montreal by then at McGill studying with Pierre Beluse. And I was one of the busiest guys around, except during the summer, because all my friends were working because they were all subbing for me while I was at the camps. He said, "No,
Mhm.
I'm going to the camps, and that's all I'm doing this summer." Spent all my money, of course, but it was an
Yes.
investment. And that's where I met you at that marimba camp. What was the name of the camp?
Um, the Ohio, I really don't remember. But I must tell you before that I should tell you about Arthur Fiedler and me.
Okay, yeah,
You know, okay. Well, I had gone to San Jose State University after my kids were, in school and so forth. I went back and I had a couple of years of university already. And so I went back to San Jose State to finish up. I got to San Jose State just as Tony Cerrone, who is also very well known, came to San
yes,
Jose State to teach, and he and I were the same age. And so here he was teaching me how to play the timpani and the snare drum and polishing me up and all these things. And here I was whizzing away exploring the marimba. And he's the one that got together with his buddies up in San Francisco Symphony, and they were talking about me and everything. And the word got back to Arthur Fiedler that I could play the Paul Creston concertino.
wow.
And
Which I
so
Yeah,
evidently he gave the telephone number to someone. Anyway, my daughters, I remember, had the mumps, and I had the mumps. And now I had the mumps on both sides before, but evidently we have two glands on either side where we can get the mumps. So I had the mumps all over again on both sides
wow.
when I received this telephone call. I picked up the telephone and answered it, and somebody said, "This is Arthur Fiedler. I want you to come and play for me tomorrow." And I went, "Oh my." I said, "Oh, well, that would be lovely, sir." He says, "I want you to play the Creston. You come to San Francisco tomorrow." I was living in San Jose at that time. And so I said, "But sir, I have the mumps. It would be very dangerous for you." "Oh, don't worry about that," he said. "You come." And I said, "All right, I will." So I quickly called up Priscilla Michaels, my accompanist, and we got together and we packed the marimba, threw it in the van that I was driving at that time, and up we went to San Francisco. He was the mumps, so Priscilla drove, and we got up there, put the marimba together, and we were told to roll it out on this stage. I think it was the Civic Auditorium. I can't remember for certain in San Francisco, but it was right in that complex in the San Francisco Center. And we rolled it out, and sure enough, way back in the distance was Mr. Fiedler. And so he said, "All right, you begin playing for me." So we played. And at the end of the first movement, I said, "Do you want to hear more?" "Oh, yes, I want to hear the whole thing." So we played the second movement. We went on through the third movement. Okay, now this was in 1967. And he said, "I want you to play next summer with the San Francisco Pops." I said, "All right." And so we agreed that I think it was a Saturday night right after July 4. of 1968 that I would play with the San Francisco Pops Orchestra, all three movements of the Creston Concertino. So I got up there to rehearsal, and that was an amazing experience. First of all, Mr. Fiedler was something of a percussionist himself. So he knew what to say, but he'd also studied violin, is my understanding, when he was a kid. He knew
Okay.
exactly what to tell the violinist, and he raked those strings, particularly the concertmaster, over the coals. It was wonderful. It was one of the greatest lessons. It was really to pay off very much later in my career. But he was into all sorts of details about how to phrase and how to compare marimba phrasing to the bowing and violins and all this sort of thing, and how to get everything just right so that they articulated as crisply as I did. I mean, that was really something, I felt like maybe I was something kind of special.
Well,
And
I mean,
so
I have to
we
interject
rehearsed
this for Linda. I have to interject for a second because those who don't know that piece, I mean, back then that was the piece that if you played that piece, you played marimba, and it was a very challenging
yes.
piece and very. I mean, challenging, demanding, very musical, and it was like one of the main repertoire works. So, it's important for us to know that. I mean, many works have been composed since then, but that was the big scary one.
Yes, yes, yes. At that time, later on, there was others that were harder, but that was the big one at that time. And even today, to do it really well with the rhythmical overlays and everything is quite complex. And I have done it since. For instance, I did it with the University of Lethbridge Wind Orchestra with me conducting and Dane Richardson playing. And it's very complex to get the clarinets going with this and etc. While the marimbist is trying to play. So it's a great piece, one everyone should study. Anyway, so he agreed, and so the next summer, of course, we rehearsed, and then I played with the San Francisco Symphony. Got quite good reviews, as I remember, and he wanted to meet and talk with me again. So he met with me, and he really talked seriously. He wanted me to go to Boston. He mentioned Japan, other things. But he wanted me to be able to play on Friday nights, and that was a problem because I had been raised and was at that time a very devout Seventh-day Adventist and didn't think it was appropriate for me to play on Friday nights. Saturday nights were great. Friday nights was part of our religious beliefs to not perform for professional things. And so I turned him down. He told me I was making the great mistake of my career. And indeed, it did change the direction of what I did. But that was a really meaningful thing because later on, I was to run into him when I was in Columbus, Ohio. And I was playing with the Columbus Symphony Orchestra. And we were playing a composition, I remember, with several different movements. And he recognized me when I came in, and he looked at me like, oh. And he played kind of maybe a trick on me. I'm not certain, but I think it was. I think he was a little miffed at me, and so he wanted to get even. So they were on the first movement, I remember, of the composition, and he was down there working with the violinist and the violist and just in the inner circle. And then suddenly he said something to them, and I knew he's jumping. He's jumping to the fourth movement. I was reaching forward to grab my triangle, which was what I had for the first beat on the fourth movement. But of course, I was too late by the time I heard it. And so I had to stand up, get up, hold that triangle, and get ready. And he stopped and had the one-liner of all times. Now, for a little background, at that time, I was teaching percussion methods to future band and orchestra conductors in 3 different universities in the area. And so I would be teaching them well. Anyway, he said to me, Linda, don't you know how to hold the triangle? And everybody burst out laughing, and he thought, oh, he had no idea what was he had really said, because everybody said, yeah, sure, Linda doesn't know how to hold the triangle. And so he got even with me, and that's the last time I ever saw him, because he died shortly afterwards.
Yeah, it's funny because I taught percussion techniques courses at McGill after I had
Sure.
graduated, so I know exactly. Then you're teaching everybody how to deal with percussion, how to percussionists, and I mean that's a big job because
Yes.
most teachers don't do that. And I had a funny story about that. That's why I insisted when they offered me that job to teach the percussion techniques class. I said I have to because most people have no idea. So when I was in high school, my high school teacher, they would warm up the band. They would do all of these things. The percussionists were just sitting there 90% of the time. So then I realized I got smart. I said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play flute. So when he was rehearsing the band, I sat in the flute section, got a flute, and would play with the flute players. And then when they were all finished and ready for us, I'd go back in the percussion section. I said, so I said, if you're not going to pay attention to the percussionists, I'm going to learn something. So,
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. And I remember at Columbus Symphony. Actually, that's where Jim Moore and I used to work a lot during those rehearsals on the books that you owned.
yeah.
And I remember each one of us percussionists that were playing there all had projects we were working on.
Okay.
And then somebody was always the one that was always counting bars to cue us and say, oops, time to get busy and play. That's the way we went.
Wow. Now I remember that you had done a lot of work with Jim on that, and he was, I mean, he wouldn't sit still. I would see new works all the time, new arrangements of pieces. I mean, that was the great thing. How did this relate with with PIS? Because I just learned that PIS is going to be 50 years soon, officially.
Yes,
So if we do the math, this was pre-PIS, right?
yes,
Okay.
that's right.
Wow. Amazing. So you're before that whole organization, before all that movement.
Yes.
Yeah. I hope it's
In other
documented,
words,
Linda.
I worked with Gary Olmsted before Percussive Arts Society became official,
Okay.
and Jim Moore, and all of, a lot of people like that. Very special people, wonderful people.
Very dedicated people. I mean, they worked very hard
Yes,
to gather all this information because those of us who were coming up and trying to learn something, really at the time there were very few structures that we could turn to. That's why you see a marimba camp or you see something going on, well, we gravitate because that's where you meet the people who you're going to be colleagues with at some point, or people you connect with musically. Um, and
rest of
let
our
me,
lives.
yeah, yeah, and then you left there. You went to Lethbridge, Alberta, in Canada.
That's right. Yes, my daughters by that time were teenager, it's the sort of things. It was time for university and all that sort of thing. And so I was just finishing up my PhD. But first, I should backtrack and tell you about my PhD because it goes right into some of the things you were talking about. Particularly watching my daughter and the situations with her, and remembering myself about counting all the measures and doing all this sort of thing and everything. Um, One of the things that I noticed was that most band directors have no idea how to work with percussionists.
Yeah.
And so my advisor, Peter Costanza, and he's still living, by the way, he and we worked around and we decided, well, how could we find out about how to work with that sort of a thing. And we decided we must do a foundation study. And we set out the study, and it ended up being an enormous project. That was my PhD dissertation. And that was measuring the verbal and nonverbal communication between the band director and the different instrument groups in the band. And we did a few orchestras too. And we sent various people out to measure what they talked about, how they talked about it, how often they talked, all this sort of thing. And so we had loads and loads of statistics. I'm trying to remember. It seems like it was the gal that entered my data. I don't remember, something like 54,000 entries that we had collected. And so we had lots of bands and a few orchestras. Conductors were doing, who they were talking to, who they were looking at, who they were ignoring with their batons, and so forth. And from there went kind of the next direction of my career, because when I went to the University of Lethbridge, I was really going there more as a music educator and wind orchestra conductor, or the band.
Okay.
The most formal of, university bands. And so I was the conductor at the University of Lethbridge.
Okay, but just to back up a little bit, in your findings, I'm curious about this. When you did this PhD, what were your conclusions in this? What are the sections that they're working with the most or paying attention to the least? Anything that you found that was really odd or exceptional?
No, it was as we had predicted. First of all, it's the people in the immediate area around them. So if it's an orchestra, the concert master, the first cellist, etc. And if it's the band, it's the flute. The first clarinet is very important, and then the saxophones and so forth. And then the brass after that, and then eventually we peel off, and rarely their eyes and the tip of their baton angles back toward the percussion section. And then, as you can imagine, it is almost all negative comments.
Wow.
Now,
Interesting.
there may be an exceptionally good percussionist in that group, and they may occasionally get the positive nod. And then the conductor will say, will you show everybody else how to do it? Because the conductor has no idea what to do. And so that's the basic, exactly what you would expect.
Right.
But we found that was the case, and time after time after time. Didn't make any difference who the conductor was. And in all the different conducting studies that I was involved in after that, it showed very similar things. And their voice very seldom would extend back. You could hardly hear it back in the percussion section, right?
Right. I don't know. Of course.
And the baton, being able to conduct here and do this, and then go back up to this group and make sure you're conducting straight back there to the timpanist or whomever. No, they don't know how to do that. And how to focus that and to get their eyes to do it, as well as the baton. And the other thing is they just know how to beat time. They don't know how to make music with their batons. Percussionists, interestingly enough, are very good at it. Percussionists, when they become conductors, almost inevitably are very good conductors.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we should maybe put it out there that more percussionists become conductors, because we need more of that. I know a few percussionists who have become conductors, and they're amazing. In fact, there's one in China, Li Biao, who was a major percussionist there, and he's a conductor. And I saw him, I didn't see him in person, but he would do Ravel's Bolero, but he would be playing the snare drum and conducting the orchestra, right? Why not?
Wow. Oh, that's great. I'd love to see that.
Yeah. And The funny thing is, I'm sure you'd agree with this. I mean, we percussionists are more creative. Well, we have to be more creative because we have to always think outside the box. We always have to think of things that are not traditional, things that are, we have to invent as we go along all the time. So being a conductor, if you're a percussionist and a conductor, then you would tend, I mean, I'm speculating here, that to be a much more creative person and go further in getting the music out of certain sections or how things work in certain
Yes.
certain circumstances, right?
Oh, yes. Um, Will Rapp, I don't know if you happen to have known him, but he's the one that got that the collection of marimbas. He's now retired, but he got a collection of marimbas at a university in Pennsylvania, and it's really quite special and everything. He was also a conductor, and he took the conducting diploma program, in which I later taught. And he was very good at that. He was an excellent percussionist, and when he got up to conduct, he was very, very good. But I've seen others just wail away at it. They were very good.
Right. Now, when you were continuing on the conversation of when you were in Lethbridge, Alberta, which kind of surprised me when I heard you were in Lethbridge. Well, that's fantastic. And I mean, the fact that you were out there. And I wanted to bring up that with repercussion, when we first started touring, as when we got out of university and we started touring, and we were touring, starting to tour the world very quickly. But we were always the four of us were like these four crazy guys who wanted to know everything, and we would work with all the people around, top people that we could. And we'd have Louis Charbonneau sit in on some of our sessions when we were working on a piece. Louis Charbonneau being the timpanist of the Montreal Symphony, one of the great
That's right.
timpanists of all time, besides Vic Firth and a couple of others. And then Pierre Beluse, who was my teacher, and he was a genius also. And then when we were touring, I said to the guys, we're going to be in Lethbridge, Alberta, and Linda Pimentel is there. Why don't we ask her to coach us on a couple of pieces? Because we would spend, I'm not joking, 40 hours a week rehearsing. And that's the way we structured ourselves. Besides touring, besides our personal and all of that, we just spent
We're
so
dedicated.
much time. And so we did. And we came to Lethbridge, and we sat with you and we worked with you, and I forget what the music was at the time. It was some classical pieces, that because we insisted that as percussionists we could play everything. Doesn't matter if it's Bach or Ravel or Stravinsky, doesn't matter. There are 7 notes, and you just make music out of it. Whether it's a Bartok string quartet, which we did all these recordings, and we
Yes.
make it sound better than the string quartet, because we could. One can if you
Of course.
spend enough time and go deep, and of course it takes a lot of time. So that was nice. Do you remember that one?
Yes, and you get all those nuances, all those nuances just right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, it was great working with you, and I always remembered you as very. You had a really good ear for melody and getting the sound, and we were always after getting the right sound, getting the right approach to it. What is the idea behind this music? And if you're going to, and I'm really happy to have worked with these guys who were, I mean, we're still together, we're still perform, believe it or not. Not as much as before. We used to do 150 concerts a year, from Europe to China to all over the world, and with orchestras. We did so much. We were like, and we would do a stage show. It was like the Pink Floyd of percussion. We went off the deep end on that. We were having so much fun. But we're all of the same mind that if we're going to do something, it's got to be like deep, and it's got to be the best, or go home. So, and that was great. But how long did you
May I
stay?
toss something in here? That is
Yes.
that again, I've always felt that sometimes when you bring things from other venues into percussion, that sometimes we make them beautiful and interesting in brand new ways. So you working with transcriptions and so forth, some very amazing work.
Ah,
Yes, I remember.
oh, thank you, thank you. How long did you stay in Lethbridge? You were there for quite a long time, right?
Yes, uh-huh. And my husband and I retired from the University of Lethbridge. He was the dean there. And then we went to Arizona in our retirement.
Ah,
But
wow,
I was there for a couple of decades.
nice,
And so,
nice.
and let's see, I have an honorary degree from there and other things. And so, yeah, I was highly regarded. And another thing, she's in the United States. Alberta was oil rich at that time,
Yes.
and they were paying high scale. So I was just thrilled to get that job. And I just love teaching there. I love that area of the world. It's so beautiful.
Right, and close to, I mean, it was south of Alberta, south of Calgary. I'm just thinking in my mind, it was south of Calgary, right? Or is it between Calgary
That's
and
right.
Red Deer? No, it was south, south. Yes, I remember. Because we would
Yeah, south of
do
Calgary. We were an hour from by auto. We were an hour from the border of the U.S. and Canada.
right, right, and it's great that I mean they brought in people like you to, places like out of, we would say out of nowhere, but a lot has been developing out there. I mean, Calgary has really developed.
Brand new university and everything. Yes,
Yeah, and very forward thinking. And of course, I mean, we all know Banff out there that they spend tremendous
yes,
amount of energy, time, and money, and still developing great programs, international programs out there.
yes.
I had attended a few of those workshops, like a 3-week jazz program with Dave Holland and all those people there. Beautiful what they've done. I'm not sure if they're still carrying. I believe they do. They're still carrying on that tradition of high level international artistry and with different programs in theater, dance, film, writing, music of
Yes,
all kinds,
yes.
which is something we need, more of. I mean, they're still doing it, but I think we need more of that.
I
But
yes, I think the whole province really very much attuned to that. For instance, at the University of Lethbridge, our dance program was really interesting, and the theater and the art gallery was amazing. For such a small university, because it was a small young university.
yes, yes.
And so I really enjoyed being there. It was a great place to have the center core of my career.
Did you ever? I'm just curious. There was a fellow musician who actually I went to school with and did a lot of work with. He was a violinist, but went on to be a conductor. And he conducted the Montreal Symphony. He was doing some assistant conducting, and Repercussion did a few concerts with the Montreal Symphony, and one of them he conducted. And I think then he went out to Calgary. Rolf Birch, does the name mean anything to you? Rolf Birch. He went out
Well,
to
I heard Calgary Symphony for years, but that may have been just right after I left or something,
okay,
because Ralph Birch, did you
Rolf
say?
Birch.
No, I
Yes,
don't
yes,
know him.
yeah, yeah. He moved out there for that to work with the Calgary Philharmonic, and then I think he was working with another orchestra. I mean, I've lost track of that, but that was some time ago. I guess it was after you.
Yes.
Your connection with PIS. Are you still work? Did you still do work with them, or you stayed pretty much in that world of teaching in Lethbridge?
Well, actually, I ventured in another way, away from PAS. And it became so overwhelming with trying to do too many things that I got invested more in the development of WASB. I don't know if you've heard of WASB, World Association of Symphonic Bands and Ensembles.
Oh, okay. I
And
did not know
it's an
this.
international organization that has conductors, primarily band conductors and composers and so forth that work together. And I got involved in those. So I had the unique opportunity to have been on the international board of Percussive Arts Society and of WASB, World Association of Symphonic Bands and Ensembles. I was the first woman ever on the board there. And
Nice.
and I think Karen Irvin and I were the first women at Percussive Arts Society. So those were real honors, and I was glad to do that. It's kind of a community service thing that you do to broaden the profession, solidify it.
Nice, nice. The I noticed you had mentioned the other day that you had a marimba, the first Keelan marimba. Keelan Musser was the first to make the plastic notes. I know Keelan very
Yes,
well
it's right
because
here. Can you see it there at all?
yes,
Any of
yes,
it?
yes, yes.
Okay.
And it's
All right.
interesting because I'm not sure if they're. I think Musser's still making the Keelan, but when they first came out. For us, when we were touring so much, and we would bring the instruments with us everywhere, all over the planet. When we started using the wood instruments, the notes would go out of tune. It was like real havoc for a while. So we quickly transitioned into using only Keelan instruments, the Musser instruments, for all our work. So we had the big concert grand, the M31. Just because it's the only thing that could withstand all the temperatures that we would put all the instruments through. We'd be in the Yukon, and then we would be flying to China, then we're going to Mexico, and we'd be, all over the place.
Yes.
And
Wow.
carrying the instruments. At the time, we can't do that now, but we used to carry like 2,000 pounds of instruments with us. It was crazy. But
So
you're mentioning this is one of the first Keelan instruments?
well, the one that's here is the first one that was 4.5 octaves. That is the larger bars and everything. Right. And so it's a F going up 4.5 octaves to a C. And it's the first one that was ever made. Now, I happen to have two marimbas. One of them has gone up to the Marimba Museum in Pennsylvania. And that was a Roseland wood one. My students called it Rosie. My students called this one Kelly. So this is Kelly. I may introduce you. And anyway, she has suffered a great deal, been through everything. And I'm not going to go there because that took a long time to tell. But how this came about was one day, Jim said, we're going to go over to Chicago and we're going to go over to the Musser factory, Linda. They've got something they want to show you. So he and Marilyn, his wife, and I got in the car and we drove over to Chicago. And we got out, went in, and there was this marimba. This very one, the first one, big one that was ever made. And so they said, you want to play on it? So I picked up some mallets and started playing. And the employees, all the employees from the factory came out and they were listening and clapping. And I ended up playing for, maybe close to 2 hours. Everything I could think of, and incorporating on down to the low F and suddenly reworking things, and they were thrilled. And at the end of it, they said, well, you just received the keys to the marimba. And so we took it home and here it is. It's mine.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And so I keep it around and I do play on it still. Some don't ask me to play because I have, arthritis. And then I also had a fall and ended up doing some breaking of arms and other damage. But I can still please myself, kind of.
Nice.
And guess what I study out of? My own books. to rebuild my skills as an old gal.
Nice. Nice. Wow. I mean, you've done so much. How many books did you write? I'm trying to think of, do I have your books? I must have, because I have like a million books here. I mean, you can see this is my playground here.
I think my brain says 5. And of course, some of them were my own compositions, and most were my arrangements. Now, Jim Moore had a few arrangements in the books too, and he did the publishing. So we put his name because he was the better known, his name and my name both. And then there's a few things that just had my name. And then this was one of the things I had to promise to do. This is the 3 big marimba tunes that I arranged that was supposed to be for this instrument.
Okay.
And supposedly everyone that was sold had a copy on it, so they'd have something to try to play. And so I've got a copy of that, the old ones left there.
Nice, nice. Now that I remember, because I have a whole bunch of books collections from James Moore. So yes, now I remember that some of your arrangements were in those. I remember now. I would
Yes.
I would buy everything in sight, every book, mallets and timpani and percussion, drum set.
Weren't we all that way? Oh, yes. I mean, um, my collection, and it includes trumpet music due to my husband, and piano literature and everything, and all went to Northern Arizona State University, and that's where my collection sits now.
Nice, nice. Yeah,
Former students of mine.
beautiful. And I mean it's really interesting what we when you look back, and I always think about I don't like the word the word pioneer. I mean, it's someone who has spent so much time developing not only the repertoire but the techniques of the instrument, and in the education, but also in research. And when I'm thinking back, I mean, the first people that come to mind, of course, are you. And there was another person, Karen Irwin. Do you remember her?
Oh yes, Karen Irvin. She was also the first member of the board with me for Percussive Arts Society. Yes, she was a lovely person.
Yep. And I had her album because she had recorded an album, and I bought the album. Of course, as I say, I used to buy everything. And here's a funny story. One day, maybe 15 years ago, I receive a call, and it's Karen Irwin Pershing. And she said, Aldo, you were in Montreal, right? I said, yes. She says, I noticed your COSA Academy is 2 blocks from where I am spending the summers in Montreal. Yes.
Wow.
So I said, what? I said, you're serious? She says, yes. And I was looking for a place to rehearse. And I said, well, we have everything there because the repercussion rehearses at the academy, and I have everything, a double, triple of everything. So she would come every summer. At the time, she had a boyfriend in Montreal, so she would come there, and she would come and practice all summer.
Oh, wonderful.
I said, wow, this is incredible, like totally out of the blue. Karen Irvin, and she was another, I mean, for lack of a better word, pioneer like yourself, like who brought the marimba right to the forefront, because she was a great player and a great person,
Oh
of
yes,
course.
she was
But,
super.
and, some people say there weren't that many women at the time, but I beg to differ. I mean, there were a lot of women playing, a lot of great musicians.
Oh, and out in the Los Angeles area, there were so many women I never met that were really big, clear back in the 50s, 40s, way back
Yep.
in the 20th century.
Yeah, that was nice. So I thought I would share that with you because it was just one of those things that you say, wow, it's someone that I had been listening to, I had never met. I knew all about her from as an artist, but all of a sudden she shows up at in Montreal in the studio, and here we are. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, if you ever see her again, tell her that I remember her with fondness, both her musicality and having the chance to be on the board with her and everything. She
Yeah.
was just a great gal.
No, she was amazing, and I think she had a problem though. She was a heavy smoker, and I think that got the best of her. So I'm not sure. I don't think she's alive right now, but yeah, because
Oh,
she
she may not be.
yeah
Yeah.
yeah I think she smoking too much, and I think she had a real problem with her lungs and all that kind of stuff. But
Oh,
it
sure.
was it was it sure was a great moment. Those few years that she would come by. Any other stories that you could share in your long and illustrious career, not only as a marimbist but a conductor, and funny stories, because we all have a bunch of funny stories that sometimes we don't have enough time to tell.
Well, now I have some that are a little different. Um, I had three strange death threats. Yes, death threats. And I'm not the only musician that has had that sort of thing happen. I have found through the years. When I first started way back when I was at San Jose State University, and it was piano rather than marimba that caused this particular one. And there was this, I was playing Rachmaninoff piano concerto, which is third piano concerto, the one in D minor. That's very, very difficult. And I was doing that with the San Jose Symphony Orchestra. Gibson Walters was conducting. And there was this, I remember he was a tall man and he was quite well to do, and he was about my age, and he was studying part time there at the university. And he said he wanted me to help him learn to play it. So I said, sure. I gave him a price for the lessons, and I got the permission of Gibson Walters, who was head of the department. And he said, okay, why don't you take this room right across the hall from his office? And so I taught him his lessons. And he got very angry because I couldn't give him the gift of playing it. He wanted me to hand him this spiritual gift. To find out, he had been in an insane asylum and in the state of California. When Reagan was governor of the state of California, he decided to get rid of those. And this young man, who came from a very well-to-do family, uh, was then let go of this one particular place. And he was spending his time hanging around San Jose State University. There was other people that had problems with him too. Anyway, he started telling people around there, do you think if I killed her and I ate her, I could learn to play the Rachmaninoff third piano concerto?
Wow.
And he kept following me around, and he's done other odd things, although I don't think he's ever murdered anyone, best of my knowledge. And let's see, I'm trying to remember. I can't remember for certain the second time. I know there was a second time, but I can't think of it right now. But the third time was conducting. And this man, he was a high school band director, and he was at the conducting diploma program at the University of Calgary, which I taught in for several summers. I was going to help him with his conducting. He became very upset and said he would refuse to let a woman help him. And the other students
Wow.
tried to calm him down, etc. And then he started making death threats. He said, we should get together and kill her. No woman should ever conduct. Women should not be allowed to do it.
Wow.
So in this day and age of feminism, I've run into some feminism situations, shall we say. And he thought that I should never have been allowed to conduct. And
Wow.
so I've had those kind of unusual experiences. How about that? And I've lived through it.
Yeah, yeah. But on the positive side, you've obviously influenced and inspired a lot of people along the way in a positive way, which is really nice. And
I
I
hope
mean,
so.
oh, for sure. I certainly can tell you that, going from my own experience, and anybody who came across your path, I am sure, because that was especially in the beginning of the PIS pre-PIS, where there was nowhere to really look. I mean, you and James Moore really were carrying the
Yes,
torch and helping everybody. We're getting the music out there, getting it in people's hands, which is amazing. I mean, that's all that music still being published? Moore's and all of the
yes,
things you
it
guys
is.
did?
It's still
Okay,
available
good.
online.
Nice, nice.
Um,
Well,
Permus is the publisher, PERMUS, as in percussion PER, and then muse as in music. And
right.
it's still being published in Columbus, Ohio.
Nice. Nice. Well, that's good to hear. And I hope anybody who's listening that who might be interested should check these out. And check out
It's kind of
uh
odd. Once a year, I suddenly get this little check in, and it's kind of interesting. Oh, that's right. That's royalties from. It's small, but it's always fun.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then
But
I
it
always think of Jim Moore. What
yeah,
a dear man he was.
yeah. And it's I mean, I'm certainly happy that I came across not only your path but Jim's, because he was a very dedicated person. I still remember him looking and always obsessing about the music being right, and he's always working. I mean,
Yes.
good role models, I'll say.
Yeah.
And I think,
Interestingly enough, there's others that through the years that uh, uh, have recently have come back. Dave Eiler,
oh
who
yes, I
was
know
a
David.
percussionist
Yes,
that taught in the Upper Midwest for quite a while. Warren Heyer and others have come by to visit me
nice.
here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I'm living. By the way, I was born in Chattanooga and now I'm living in Chattanooga, back home.
Wow, wow, that's interesting. And I mean, Mike Balter, of course, right? Um,
Who?
Mike Balter,
Oh, yes.
the Mallets. Yeah, I mean, he and I
Oh,
are
yeah.
very good. Yes, he and I are good friends. David Idler too, and I think I met David when I went to one of those percussion camps. So we've been friends for many years. But Mike Balter,
Oh,
I met him years later. I became an artist with his company, of course, and remained friends for years. And to this day, I speak to him on a regular basis. And we had stories about Maury Leishon and Frank's Drum Shop in Chicago, who were
oh, I loved that shop.
well, Maury and Jan became kind of my second parents for a while. They even visited here, and I mean they're great people, and another set of people who just inspired and created a shop, an environment for anybody coming through, and just doing great stuff. And I remember once when I went to that percussion camp, I went to his shop, and I said to him after we were there for a couple of days, and I was, sitting around the store watching people come in and out, all of these great artists coming in and out, and just before leaving, I said to Maury, I said, Maury, I would really love to buy an M55 Vibe, but I don't have the money. So he looked at me. He says, Aldo, take the vibes, send me the money when you have it. So, I mean, amazing. It just totally blew my mind. So I did that, and I sold everything I had around me. I I said, I can't let him down. I put the money together quickly enough, but he was that kind of guy who just, believed in people and gave them a chance, and that's the way you do it moving
Wow,
forward,
that's a
right?
lovely story. Now, I have one other person I forgot to mention that I should. That is that I worked with Celso Hurtado at one period in my life. You know who Celso Hurtado was?
I don't.
Well, Percussive Art Society did because I think they recently dedicated him onto, I can't remember whatever it's called that we have that
The
to
Hall of
some of the
Fame?
founding fathers.
Okay.
Anyway, uh, the Hurtado family were the family that came from Guatemala with their Guatemalan marimbas and toured the U.S. in the early 20th century. And they played at World's Fairs, they played at all sorts of different places. And so this would be in the 1960s. I heard that Celso Hurtado was living in the Palo Alto area where I was living, Stanford University area, and that he was looking for a pianist. And I thought, maybe I could go play his piano accompaniments. And so I went over, I called him up and I said, I hear you need a pianist. I'd be glad to accompany you and practicing whatever you want. And I didn't even mention a price because I thought this is a way in to something that would be unique. And so I had a chance to work with this old Guatemalan marimbist, but only for a short while. Celso was a big flirt. Not unusual. These things happen. And so eventually it became just too hard to work with him because he became both competitive when he found out I could play marimba and could play well. And also that I was not going to succumb to his advances, let's say.
Okay.
And so anyway, eventually I just decided, no. Sorry, Celso, you find yourself a new accompanist, and went on my way. But he had some amazing things that he did. And the instruments he played on were quite different. He had them built himself, custom built, and they were about 5, some of them were smaller, but most of them were about 5.5 octaves. Big things.
Okay.
And the keyboards were set a little different. C sharp was set immediately over C, and D sharp or E flat was set immediately over D. And that made them really wild. And so he loved to brag. For instance, Vida Chenoweth, who wrote about the marimba, and she had a book way back when.
Right.
I guess he used to brag that he was so much better than her. And I asked, well, why so? He said, well, she couldn't play on my marimba. Well, I took a look at his marimba and said, of course, no one could. You'd be going, where's that note? Because it was set up so different. So anyway, so I accompanied him and he approved my accompanying. And then I went home and I set up a marimba, quote unquote, I think on my dining room table, in which it was nothing but spare bars I had, but I set it up just exactly as he had it. And I started practicing pieces on there. And I tried his techniques. And soon I could play his marimbas. And that just infuriated him. But I did learn some unusual things. So I must mention that.
Okay.
First of all, he had a large repertoire. I think it was over 500 pieces that at any given moment he could play them all.
Wow.
And his idea was to have a memorized repertoire that he could, at a moment's notice, play, which is an interesting concept because most of us are quickly jumping over to learn the latest piece, But he had this huge repertoire that he practiced, and so at least once a week he went through every piece. And then there was some other things. For instance, he made very small motions in comparison to our big whacks. He worked this way, just very small. And he made some of his own mallets. They were quite different, a Guatemalan style. And but with those small mallet movements, he could do some unusual things. For instance, he would make an arm motion like this. Let's say you're going to play, just to make it easy, imagine F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, 3 bars. He would do it like this, playing the 3 of them. So it was one arm motion, just 3 little quick. I gathered some techniques that I began to apply regularly. And when you saw me, that was when I was using them. And so I may well have shown you some of that too.
Yes. No, I remember, now that you mention it,
because learning to make little motions and big arm motion. Does that sound familiar?
Yes. Now I remember. Yeah. I mean, we use that technique also in drum set playing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Now I remember it.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, definitely. And in multiple percussion, I played loads of the multiple percussion solos that were well known, say from the periods of the 1970s through the 2000, roughly. And we used a lot there of that technique. Then another thing was getting what he called emotion in the music. And I listened to him and I said, "Do you mean motion?" He said, "No, emotion." And he would take, and I have my legs crossed and I'll try to sit here and do a little tap for you. He would go like this. And he'd be jerking back and forth. So he would be taking 2 spots in the bar and striking back and forth. And then he would make this motion like this that gave it a little impulse. And as you listen to the Guatemalan marimba music, you will hear that. It is really a part of their playing. The final thing was that at the bottom of the resonators, there were these buzzer things that they created. And that's a different story. I'm not going to even go there with that. But this, making this kind of a roll in which in the middle of the roll, suddenly you put in a little extra shove to speed it up and change the speed of it and so forth. That I used a lot of that. And then later Bill Shinstein, I know, incorporated it in some of the snare drum pieces, and some of the snare drum solos of his I used to do. I remember included a lot of that. Yeah. But this idea of moving back and forth and getting this little impulse in, it was really, it gave an interesting sound.
Interesting.
So celso hurtado, and that's CELSO.
You know, now that you mention it,
hurtado is.
I have a visual of, I believe it was last year that he was inducted into the Hall of Fame.
That's right. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yes.
That's
what I have a visual of that. Yeah. It was very recent that he was given that. Yeah, interesting. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Linda,
he deserved it. He really did.
Well, I mean, there's another marimba group from Mexico, Nanda Yapa. Remember them? That whole percussion group, and I saw them live once. Really interesting. With it's the first time I had heard the buzzes that they put on the resonators right underneath the notes. Right. That was interesting.
Mm-hmm. And it gives a very different sound.
Yeah. And then, of course, when we started studying West African drumming and balafon playing, well, I mean, then I realized, well, there's a connection there because they have the same buzz.
A strong connection. Yes.
Yeah. That was very interesting.
And then I often wanted to explore further, and I never had time in my life, but tracking back to the gamelan gong and how some of those things moved across Asia and then into Europe and so forth, and what had to do with it, clear on up to the cimbalum. That is like the inside of a piano, and you play it with a hammer like this. And I just love the cimbalum. If I had another lifetime to do, I would want to purchase a cimbalum and work on learning to play it. Because the sound is just out of this world.
Yeah, that's a beautiful instrument. Very, I mean, you use your plucking and your playing. Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And
very interesting.
And you play it this way. It's almost like the timpani. By the way, as far as my timpani playing is concerned, I had absolute pitch, so timpani was relatively easy for me. And except I always had to adjust to make sure I was with the orchestra, because sometimes orchestras play out of tune, but that's a different topic. And we could all talk about that. But Cloyd Duff with the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra was my biggest influence as far as timpani playing is concerned. He was a wonderful timpanist.
Oh, yes. Yeah. He was one of the top.
And playing duets. Gary Olmsted and I used to get together often when I was still living in Columbus, and we'd go back and forth, both in Columbus and over where he lived in Western Pennsylvania. And we would practice, and we did a lot of guitar duets because you can voice them in 4 voices, and it's all laid out really well, and you can play them like marimba duets. We had loads of fun with that. I remember joyful years making music with Gary. He's very musical.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, Linda, we could be talking for weeks and months, but I do want to thank you for taking the time with me. It took a while to get this together, but I'm so happy we finally connected, and you had the time to dedicate so that we do this. And it was very important for me, just so you know, very important for me to have you in this conversation and shaping your journey, because every instrument has its own challenges. Every person who takes on an instrument or a part of our world, our percussion world, our music world, there's always unique approaches. And you're definitely one of those who took unique approaches for all of these years. I personally thank you for doing that and for doing this.
I'm just thrilled. I am truly thrilled to see you and to talk with you, and oh, this is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. And as I always say, to be continued.